Hey everyone, welcome back to the next lesson in this module, and this time we're going to do a little bit more detail around the how of creating the and sustaining board executive director relationships. So we're going to be talking about the what. Let's talk a little bit about how we can go actually about getting those relationships to be what we want them to be. The first strategy is to make sure we work on two-way communication that goes beyond contact at board meetings. Board meetings increasingly are less and less frequent. So traditionally we used to have board meetings pretty much every month. Then we often dropped 1 month in the summer, very often July or August, and then often in December we have Christmas gatherings. Everybody is busy. So a 10 board meeting year is pretty common. Increasingly, however, and some of this is in organizations that have some geographic distance between board members, provincial, state organizations, national organizations, but even in pretty locally compact organizations, we're beginning to see quarterly board meetings. And my concern about that is not that we can't do business pretty efficiently using quarterly board meetings. They tend to be longer. We often meet for an all day on a Saturday or Friday night, Saturday morning kind of thing if you are having people travel to your board meetings. But what we're really doing here is we're putting a fair amount on the agenda, which means usually a longer meeting. If you're only meeting quarterly, or even if you are meeting monthly most of the time, the problem is we don't get to know each other. So this whole notion of a relationship means, do we trust each other? How do we communicate? And we can use electronic communication, video conferencing, teleconferencing, etc. pretty efficiently, but I don't think it's effective in building relationships. I really like video conferencing for one-on-one meetings. So if you have board members that are really busy, even if you all are in the same town or city, or if you have board members that are geographically pushed away from the hub of your organization, Skype, Hangouts, Zoom, any of a number of different kinds of electronic platforms really help us stay in touch. And I find it personally very helpful to see a face on my laptop screen rather than just a phone call and hearing a voice. So we need to create that conversation, and it needs to be in addition to the board meetings that we have. Now make it purposeful. It should relate to the organization's work. Maybe the executive director wants a little consultation or advice in a board member's area of expertise. It can be over a cup of coffee. It can be a breakfast meeting, a lunch meeting. Those kinds of things are, the kind of making it a little bit more social, really help us get to know each other. Second strategy is that we need to understand what we are doing when we are communicating. We're doing our very best to be transparent. No secrets, no stuff behind the scenes. If we have something developing, if the board or the executive director are working on things, to be able to say, I'm working on this, or I'm putting this together, or I'm trying something new, so that there is some sense of candid conversation and that we're being honest with each other. And what we are working towards is creating trust with each other so that we know each other, we are open in our communication, we're candid, we're honest, and therefore we learned to trust each other and work together. Now the other component of trust, of course, is follow through. So when executive directors promise to do something or board members promise to do something, the expectation should be that without a whole lot of nudging, that we will deliver and that we'll deliver on time. And if we can't deliver on time for some reason, that we will let people know and just simply say, I thought I'd be able to have that ready for the August meeting. Unfortunately, I can't. These are the reasons. So that kind of honesty and transparency really helps in the communication and relationship building between executive director and board members. The third thing on the list is to make sure that we understand and respect each other's roles and that we continue to reinforce the arms around concept of policy boards rather than fingers in. And I'll remind executive directors, please avoid doing your board's jobs for it. Encourage, teach, guide, support your board to do its job, but don't do the work of the board for it. It might be faster, it might address frustrations for you, but count on it, it will weaken your board. It will annoy some board members that the executive director is doing that job, and for other board members they'll simply become more passive and less engaged, and that doesn't serve the board, the organization, or the executive director very well going down the road. Fourth thing on our list is that we want to make sure that the boundaries are clear, but they are not rigid. Now, I want to take you back to the previous lesson where we said that the board has only one employee. This might imply that no one else but the executive director should ever have any contact with board members. And clearly, that's not the intention of that rule. This is an accountability rule rather than a communication rule. So it's really important that if we have a connection with our board members, that we have flexibility. And so that may mean that there would be communication on certain items at certain points in time between a board member and a staff member. And when the executive director needs hands-on support from a board member, perhaps in an area of expertise, we talked in an earlier module about what about if we have somebody who has expertise in the area of insurance and we're doing a review of our benefit package. Well, that person would be that board member with that expertise would be a wonderful consultant to the process. So we need to understand that we don't have to have rigidity in the communication or the way that we relate to each other, and you'll pay dearly if you create too many rules. This is, after all, a not-for-profit where a certain amount of casual and trust-based and at-ease communication is expected. The fifth point on our list here is we make sure that the executive director is asked by board members, usually by the chair of the board or the board executive, what they need by way of support, what they need for input, what advice they would appreciate from. As a very young executive director in my first year or two in the role, I asked for greater understanding of how finances worked. And I was reasonably well educated, but my human services training didn't include things like how to read a balance sheet and what's an income statement of income and expense, and how to do an operating budget and how to do a capital budget. I literally did not, I was the executive director and I did not know how to do that, and I don't think that's all that uncommon. And so I kind of wanted, we have courses on it now, I kind of wanted a course, an informal course on, finance for the non-financial manager. We had an awesome chartered accountant on our board who was a CA and auditor at a local audit company, and she'd been on our board even predating me, and she was absolutely wonderful. I sat down with her pretty much every month for a couple of hours, and she taught me what I needed to know by way of understanding financial statements, the budgeting process, etc. So that was all volunteer on her part, but I can tell you that those lessons that I learned in that first couple of years on the job, I carry forward to this day in the consulting work that I do with the 300 or 400 nonprofits that I work with across the country. So it's very important that we have practical strategies to support the executive director coming from board members or coming from even people outside the organization. Sixth point on our list is to clarify the board's need for information, what and how much and in what form and in what frequency. I think we report too often. Monthly, if you have monthly meetings, monthly reports from the executive director could be overkill. Depends on your organization, its circumstance. If it's going through some tough times, if there's stuff happening in the organization, monthly reports will still be necessary. If your organization is stable and things are reasonably settled, probably a quarterly written report is more than sufficient. You could also do monthly written reports to the board, but a quarterly verbal report at a board meeting. So find your way along that path to figure out what does the board need in its governance role from the executive director. All right, number 7. We need to make sure we limit how much we exclude the executive director or CEO from board activities. I have several nonprofit clients who have embedded in their routine for years, sometimes decades, the practice of having in-camera sessions as part of every single board meeting. Just to remind you, an in-camera session is a private session of the board. It's often held within the context of an official board meeting, so you do your board business and you have your in-camera session. Sometimes you have your in-camera session first, and there are no staff in the room, so your recording secretary, if that's the staff person, leaves, your executive director, finance director, anybody else who is routinely at board meetings, that person also exits the meeting and the board has an in-camera meeting. Now, in my opinion, it's a waste of time. For the most part, we're chit-chatting, and remind yourself your board meeting is still in session, so an in-camera meeting is not an informal, off-the-record, unminuted part of the meeting. An in-camera meeting is a meeting of the board or a portion of a meeting of the board that should continue to be minuted. And this is an often overlooked little detail. Very many boards, when they go in camera, it's like the veil of silence, the cone of silence drops over them, and now they can say anything they want, they can chit-chat, they can visit, they can tell stories, they can say things that are questioning or critical of any staff member, and this is not healthy. I can tell you, even the most secure and calm executive directors, when they are out of the room and the board is meeting in camera, the question will be running in their head. What are they talking about? Why do they need to do this? Are they talking about me? Why don't they, if they have concerns, share this with me directly? And frankly, that damages the relationship. So I'm going to give you the rules around when we should have in-camera sessions. And now, sometimes in-camera sessions are actual whole board meetings that are in camera, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So first of all, we can have an in-camera meeting when the executive director's performance appraisal has been completed and the board needs to review the performance appraisal report. The executive director does not expect to be part of that and will be entirely, chances are they've already seen the report and it's gone forward from committee to the executive director and then committee to the board as a whole, or it may go from the committee to the board, then back to the executive director. But it doesn't matter which order you do it in. The reality is the executive director will understand that should be a private meeting. Understandable and won't cause a particular issue, although they will be curious if they haven't seen the report yet. The second one is that if the executive director's compensation is being discussed, this may happen at a time separate from the performance appraisal, or it might happen at the same time. And of course, the executive director and the board would expect to have no staff in the room during that conversation. So that's number two, where in-camera meetings are quite legitimate. Number three is if there are performance concerns, and this may not be attached to the performance appraisal at all, or it might be part of. If there are performance concerns that have been brought forward via some other third party, for example, a program evaluation or employee satisfaction survey might have been done by somebody like me, an external consultant. The results of that might suggest there are some performance issues, and the board may wish to meet and discuss in private. Now, that will cause some concern for the executive director. However, it is entirely legitimate that the board deal with that in camera. And the fourth thing on our list is that if there is a grievance that's been brought forward to the board as a result of due process. Now, what do I mean about due process? That the person has informally attempted to resolve the issue and it didn't succeed, that the person filed a formal written grievance. This should be in your operational policies and in your board policies in writing. That the person filed a formal grievance, so that grievance was heard by a senior manager or supervisor or by the executive director and was not resolved to the employee or individual satisfaction who filed the grievance. And then usually the last and final step inside the organization to deal with a grievance or a complaint is that a written grievance goes forward or complaint goes forward to the board. Very often that grievance has something to do with how management dealt with the issue and how management didn't resolve that issue to the person's satisfaction. So in order to ensure a fair hearing of that grievance, the board needs to meet in camera. And by the way, that single meeting shouldn't be all that's in your grievance policy. Often some investigation, some research, some additional meetings, some meetings with the person who's filed the grievance, some fact-finding and fact-checking is very important. So the board probably will not make a decision in one in-camera session and may have more than one around that. So those are the four. Now there's probably a few more that under certain circumstances and are unusual and difficult situations that the board may meet in camera. But in general, that should be the only time that the executive director is excluded from a board meeting. And I'm going to remind you again, when you go in camera, you need to continue to take minutes. So if you normally have a paid staff member doing your minutes in your regular board meeting, my encouragement to you would be to take your secretary of the board or another board member and ask them to minute those meetings, that portion of the meeting, the in-camera session. And those minutes are usually secured in a sealed envelope signed with the signature of the person who kept the minutes, and they are kept separate from the board meeting minutes. So if you keep board meeting minutes in a physical binder, binder. They might still be resident in the binder, but they are in a sealed envelope, and the envelope will say minutes of the in-camera session of the Board of Directors of XY, Z or Z organization. I should learn to say ABC organization, then I don't have to translate from US to Canadian. So we have that, and then the date and the time that they were recorded, and that is then sealed and signed on the seal. Those minutes may be opened by a member of the executive, they may be opened by the auditor, and they may be opened by any officer of the court. They may not be opened by the executive director without the consent of at least a board member, executive member, and often the chair of the board can give that consent. So just a few details in terms of those in-camera sessions. Now, I'm going to remind you, you can argue with anything I said. So for those of you that are doing regular in-camera meetings and think that they're great practice, I welcome your comments on this. And please just send me an email to Paula MacLean at learningforleaders.ca, and we can have a little bit of a back and forth on that point. It tends to be a sensitive point inside organizations. Number 8 on our list is to create a primary relationship, usually the closest relationship between the executive director and the board chairperson. This communication in many organizations is very frequent. It can be daily, it can be weekly, it's certainly several times during a month and not just at a board meeting. It's important for the chairperson to feel confident in the executive director's leadership. It's important that the executive director feel that they have some place to go if there are concerns or frustrations or things inside the organization that they need to talk through or work through. Let me just tell you something that all EDs know. If you're a board member watching this, this is a lonely job. It is 40, 50, 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week. There is no one like you inside the organization. And when things get tough, frustrating, difficult, when your heart aches for the things you're having to deal with, when you're crying real tears, there is nowhere to go except to a colleague executive director in another organization, which is always a bit tough because you don't want to kind of, as my mother would say, air your family linen. You don't want to have that happen and then it be published in the broader community, so you have to be very careful the friends that you choose among your colleague executive directors, and you can't talk appropriately with good boundaries and good ethics and good integrity. You can't talk to anybody inside the organization. So having a board member, a connected board member, often the chairperson, you can have that conversation with is enormously important, very, very helpful. Number 9 on our list is create clear policy regarding the executive director accountability, and that will help you cement that relationship. If the board says to the executive director, this is how you'll be held accountable, the executive director can relax. They can say, I will be held accountable, I will manage in an accountable way, and they will feel that they have a working relationship that doesn't have a bunch of surprises attached to it. And by the way, if you find another way of doing accountability other than the 8 that we had on our Trust But Verify list, make sure you take it to a board meeting, have a conversation, and have the board pass a motion that says this is going to be added to our accountability for our executive director. One board member, including the chair, cannot just spring it on the executive director and say, oh, well, you know what, we're going to add this to what we are going to, how we're going to hold you accountable. So very important that we make sure that this is a board decision, because remember, the executive director reports to the board as a whole. Last one on our list is to establish a comprehensive board governance policies. We've talked lots about that, but I'm going to give you one more piece. The board needs to have job descriptions, at least executive positions, so chairperson, vice chairperson, or president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. Sometimes secretary, treasurer is one position. Those are absolutely essential. And then one job description for everybody else. You might also have a job description for committee chairs so that every person who agrees to chair a committee knows what the responsibilities and the boundaries are there. And remind yourself that the executive director has to have a job description as well. I was working just recently with a fairly small nonprofit organization, I think operating budget of about $500,000. And the board is really pretty good. It's got most of its governance stuff together. I was helping them create a 360-degree performance appraisal process. And then halfway through that process, they realized they had no personnel file for that, for the executive director, that they didn't have a job description for the executive director, and they wondered whether or not she had written her own job description. They're pretty sure that she probably had, because everybody else in the organization seemed to have job job descriptions. So this is a little oversight, and it was one of those kind of oops moments, and this being a really good board, I could watch at the end of the table the chair of the board write a note to himself saying, yep, got to take care of that. So one more piece here that is important is to get our roles and responsibilities clear by telling each other, this is my job, this is the thing that I need to do. All right, that's the end of this lesson, and I want to direct you to the practice learning exercise, your turn, on the next slide. Work your way through that, and please join me in the next lesson.